So one of the great movies of my college years, and I'm going to date myself just a little bit, was the movie City Slickers. I don't know if y'all remember that movie with Billy Crystal, and I love this movie. In fact, I know Tara and I used to have this on VHS, and if you don't know what a VHS tape is, ask your parents. But we had this on a VHS, and we watched it several times. Great movie. And it's really about three middle-aged guys. They grew up as friends, and every year they go on vacation together, just the three of them. And it's some kind of adventure. And the character played by Billy Crystal, his name is Mitch, he's kind of going through a midlife crisis. And so what they do is the three of them go from back east to, of all places, New Mexico. And they're on a dude ranch. And they're taking part in a cattle drive. And I love there's a scene where the three of them are on the horses and they're just kind of riding along together. And one of them asks the question, "What is your best day ever?" And maybe you have a best day ever. And after best day ever, they ask the question, "What is your worst day ever?" So two of them actually share best day and worst day. And they turn to the character Ed and say, "What is your best day ever?" And even though he was the guy who brought it up in the first place, he said, I don't want to play anymore. I don't want to do this." And they finally pressed in to ask him what his best day was. And he actually recalled a time when he was 14 years old, and his dad, who was a serial adulterer and treated the family poorly, he basically took it upon himself to kick his dad out of the house and tell him, "We don't need you anymore. We don't want you anymore. We don't love you anymore." And they said, "That's the best day ever." And then they asked him, "What is your worst day ever?" And he said these words, "Same day." And think about that. When you think about your best day ever and your worst day ever, they're probably years, if not decades apart. It's very rare when your best day and your worst day happen simultaneously. We're going to talk about a day this morning. We're going to talk about a day that, when we think about this day in the history of history, simultaneously, going on at the exact same time, this is both the greatest day in history and the worst day in history. It's the crucifixion of Jesus. This year, we have spent the bulk of 2021 journeying through the book of Mark. And we're actually on the home stretch. We, after today, have 2 more weeks in the book of Mark, and then we're going to hop into some passages in the book of John. But we're in what is called the crucifixion of Jesus. That's Mark chapter 15. If you want to turn there in your Bibles, if you don't have a Bible, there's Bibles in the seats in front of you. And if you don't have a Bible at home and one to call your very own, you're more than welcome to take that one. Put your name in it, mark it up, and let that be a gift that we would love to give you here today. But I want to remind you where we kind of landed last week. Looking at the various people around the arrest and trial of Jesus, the conclusion is no one's good. Really, no one's good. No one seeks God. No one lives up to the holy standards of God. There is no one who qualifies other than Jesus. And so that's where we're going to be here today. We're going to start with verse 20. And it says here, "And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of a purple cloak and put his clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him." And verse 21 says, "And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross." Now, Simon of Cyrene identifies where he is from. Most likely it was an area, or the capital city of what is today Libya, in northern Africa. but he is probably a Jewish person who had come back for Passover. It mentions Alexander and Rufus. And when we find names mentioned like this in the Bible, especially in telling the story, these are probably known entities within the church. Like this is 30, 35 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, and Mark is saying, yeah, you know Alexander, you know Rufus, that was his dad who carried the cross. So that's kind of an interesting sort of thing, and it was not common for somebody to carry the cross of a criminal. And it probably lends credibility to the degree of mistreatment and beating that Jesus went through even before the cross. Now let's look at verse 22. It says, and they brought him to the place of Golgotha, which means place of a skull. Which, that's kind of like, if you're going to have a name for a place of execution, place of a skull, is probably it. There's a couple of ideas here that we have to understand about executions during the day and age of Jesus, and actually during the Roman Empire. Executions took place outside of the walls of the city. So every major city would have walls that would protect it. It would be outside. And in this particular place, we would understand that this is Golgotha, a hill. Actually, where we get the name Calvary kind of comes from this whole idea. But they think that it's a place outside the walls, the ancient walls of Jerusalem, that actually look like a skull. It's an area that kind of looks like this, but this would have been a very public area. There probably would have been a crossroads, a main highway. But in addition to this, they have also found in this particular area that there were a lot of tombs around. And so this would lend credibility to this was the place of crucifixion. And with this, we get into verse 23. And it says that, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. Now, wine mixed with myrrh, they are actually some sources outside the Bible, said that there were women who would mix wine and myrrh or wine and frankincense together, and that it would actually have a narcotic effect and dull the effects of pain. And so they offered that to Jesus. He didn't take it. It says, and they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. I want to focus in on the first four words here, and they crucified him. Now, there are 4 books in the New Testament, which is the stuff that really kind of includes Jesus' life and the early church. Of those 4 books that tell the story of the life of Jesus, every gospel writer basically uses these same words to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus, and they crucified him. And that's it. Nothing more. No other explanation. And I, for one, I'm always intrigued by even the medical journals that people have put out about the crucifixion. I'm also very intrigued by archaeology. And in fact, I read this week, and this is interesting, that if you're getting your picture of what the crucifixion looked like from art, you are most likely wrong. Probably it was a much different scenario than what we can even grasp or imagine. But the reality is it was a horrific form of execution. You think about the fact that it involved nails. And it involved, they had guys that were experts in this, that they knew how to miss the artery in the wrist, but they also knew how to hit the nerve. So that when they would use the criminal on the cross would have to use the nail as a hinge to be able to breathe at all, it would affect the pain of that nerve. And I actually read this week, and in fact, we always think about Jesus' feet on top of one another and a big nail through the feet. They have actually found through archaeology that there were 4 nails used for the feet, oftentimes in crucifixion. And instead of having Jesus' feet at the front of the cross, there was a little platform on each side of the cross that they would have nailed his feet to the bottom, and then they would have nailed from the outside of his heel into into the cross. And so just the excruciating pain and torture that would take place for him to have to stand up and do it, there would be fluid in the lungs. It would be a massive asphyxiation and a loss of oxygen and literally heart failure as this would go along. We want that detail. We are intrigued by that detail. But the reason why they were able to just simply say is, and they crucified him, is because when people read those words, they didn't need explanation. They saw this every day. They had experienced this. The places of crucifixion were, man, it's like, I'm going to use a term, and some of you know what I'm talking about. It's the four-way stop in Edgewood. Now it's a stoplight. You know, it's 344 and Route 66. When you think about that Walmart parking lot, that's where they would have executions. People would go there, and it was a deterrent for crime. So they didn't need anything more. But it also says here that they divided his clothes. They divided his clothes among the soldiers. They made a little bit of money, but they didn't make much. So this was a way for them to make a little extra. And so they were casting lots. They were actually throwing dice to see who got Jesus' clothes. But here's the cool thing. Hundreds of years before Jesus, God was already writing this story. God pre-told this story. In fact, it says this in Psalm 22, verse 18. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. You know what I love about this? I love the fact that hundreds of years before Jesus, God is already writing this story, and He pre-tells this story all the way through. It's snippets throughout the Old Testament, because it really gives me assurance that God was not just up in heaven going, okay, guys, I'm going to try this next. God, in His divine plan, we go back to the very first sin. God is already beginning to unfold this plan. And so we know that God has had a plan all along. Let's look at verse 25. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. This is 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock in the morning. And the inscription of the charge against him read, the King of the Jews. Now, one of the items that they would do along with crucifixion is, again, this is a very public place. This is a crossroads. And what they would do is they would put a board and they would write the charge that the criminal was guilty of. And the idea here was to be a deterrent from crime. So as people would walk by and go, murder, that, don't want to do that. Treason, that, don't want to do that. They had all the things that they could say, I'm just not going to go there because I don't want to go here. And in this particular case, King of the Jews, while that was prophetic, and I love what it says in the book of John, that it was in 3 different languages, that Jesus was King of the Jews. But here's the reality, this would have been considered treason. And so that was what was written there. And in verse 27 it says, and they crucified, and with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. Here's what I love about this. The language, the original language here, this is what it says. These were common thugs. These were bottom dweller criminals. And our Lord was willing to die, and He was willing to be in the company of bottom dweller criminals. And if He was willing to be with them, He is willing to have a relationship with you. So let's go ahead and read on in verse 29. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, shaking their heads, and saying, aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. Now, these are just common people. These are just run-of-the-mill, ordinary, everyday people in Jerusalem, and they're walking by going, dude, you said you were going to destroy the temple and you were going to rebuild it in 3 days. If you could do that, you could certainly come down off the cross. But this is ridicule, and this is shame, and this is mocking. And the one who gave them life, they are making fun of and have lost all sense of dignity toward him. But again, God is pre-telling the story. Going to Psalm 22 again, it says, all who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. And so, again, hundreds of years, as David is writing, King David is writing this, God is actually letting us know beforehand what he's going to do. And this is going to be part of the story. But it wasn't just the passersby. Notice verse 31 32. So also the chief priest with the scribes mocked him to one another, say, he saved others. We've seen him raise the dead. We've seen him heal people. We've seen him do all this stuff. He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let Christ the King of Israel come down from the cross that we may see and believe. Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. I think about the chief priest and the Pharisees here when they are basically saying, listen, if he would just come down and save himself, then we will believe. Just another sign, another sign. And they had all the signs that they needed. They had everything that they needed. They had seen him do all this stuff. They actually said, listen, he did all this stuff. If he would just come down off the cross, save himself, then we'll believe. And maybe you're like them, that you're looking for one more thing. You're looking for one more piece of evidence. You're looking for one more miracle to say, if this would just happen, then I would believe. Let's go on to verse 33. It says, and it was the 6th hour had come. There was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Think about this. Darkness. When I think about darkness, I have a picture in my mind, and this picture doesn't even do it justice, but I've lived in New Mexico like almost 20 years. And so with that, I have forgotten what it is like to be in middle America when a thunderstorm comes. And I was reminded of this a couple of years ago. We were in Dallas. We just had a grandbaby, and Tara and I were there helping and different things like that. And we were driving down Marsh Lane, or actually up Marsh Lane to the north in North Dallas. And one of the things that happened is this is like immediately a thunderstorm came in. And so if you've not ever experienced this, it's one of those most eerie things that happens. You're in the middle of the day, 30 minutes beforehand, it was bright and sunny, and then this storm cloud moves in, and it's almost eerily dark when this happens. And when I think about darkness during this time, we can't even begin to describe how dark it was. It was most likely as dark as night. And here's the reality. When we go to the Old Testament, which is all the stuff before Jesus, the darkness that God brings on is a sign of his displeasure. So the reality is God is displeased. He is withholding light from the world. This is a supernatural phenomenon. This is not like a storm that has rolled in. God is displeased. And when I think about God is displeased here, here's what comes to my mind. Do you realize what you're doing to my son? Do you not realize that you are killing the giver of life? The book of Colossians says that Jesus is the cause behind creation. He's the creator. He is the Word of God. But there's also this. Jesus was taking on the wrath of God. He was taking on the punishment that you and I deserve. And it was at that moment that it says, and at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus was alone. Jesus was feeling the full brunt of the wrath of God. Jesus was feeling the weight of your sin and my sin. But again, interestingly, God pre-told this story. Because when you go to Psalm 22, again, Psalm 22, verse 1, it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? When David wrote these words, he wasn't thinking, hundreds of years in the future, Jesus would say these exact same words, but God knew that. And then again, and some bystanders, hearing it, said, behold, he is calling Elijah. That was the Eloi, Eloi. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, probably again the wine mixed with myrrh, put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Now let me tell you how I wanted to preach this verse right here. One of the things that I typically do before I go to commentaries and background studies is I just read the passage that we're going to be going through several times. And what I really wanted to do here is tell you that at this moment, there were certain people that were leaving the door cracked open about the possibility of Jesus, like saying, maybe Elijah's going to come and get him. Maybe they were on this side saying, this guy's crazy. This guy's nuts. He's off his rocker. And maybe they had reached the point where they were beginning to say, maybe. And I wanted to preach it that way. I wanted to say that there was good in humanity, that this was a possibility, but that's not what was happening. Even at this moment, at Jesus' darkest moment, its darkest minutes of his life, they were still mocking him. I didn't want it to be that way. But they were. I'm going to read verse 37. And I want to just sit on this for a moment. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. I'm pretty sure there will not be Netflix in heaven. But if there's some kind of service that we can go and we can see things that have happened in history in the past, I really don't know. I really don't know that I want to watch the crucifixion. But I do want to see this moment right here. I want to hear the sound of the cry. I want to hear the pain in Jesus' voice. I want to see this in such a way because I believe it is something completely different than has ever been uttered in all of history. That there was something about this cry as Jesus was feeling the full weight of the wrath of God, the full weight of our sin, that it was just something wholly different altogether. But notice verse 38. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And here's what I think about. So much of what they had against Jesus is him saying, I will destroy the temple. He wasn't talking about the literal temple, but I will destroy the temple and in 3 days rebuild it. But I wonder if... Have you seen those memes, those stupid pictures on Facebook? But there's one of a little African-American boy that kind of has these buggy eyes and this look on his face of guilt and uh-oh. Now, I don't want to be facetious here. I wonder if there were a few of those that were involved in the crucifixion of Jesus when they heard about the curtain tearing from top to bottom. And this is not just like your run-of-the-mill everyday curtain. This was like probably as much as 3 inches thick as far as the fabric is concerned. It was a supernatural event happening here. And I wonder if there was a couple of them that were like, uh-oh, we're toast. All indications, though, that didn't happen. But I want you to notice verse 39.
And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. So I want to tell you a little bit about a centurion. A centurion in the Roman army, he would have been over 100 soldiers. That was his job. And so I look at the man here, probably the centurion, and one of the things I begin to think is he was probably the guy that was over the 100 people that oversaw all of the crucifixions in Jerusalem. So in this particular area, in Jerusalem, surrounding area, anytime there was a crucifixion, these guys got crucifixion duty. By virtue of that, I'm going to say that this guy has taken part and oversaw hundreds, if not thousands, of crucifixions. So he's seen a lot. But in this, as seeing everything that he has seen, he is able to look at this one. He's able to look at this moment. He's able to hear Jesus cry. He's able to hear Jesus' words. He's able to take it all in because he's not like actively involved. He's just directing orders, and he is overseeing. And as he sees everything here, he says these words, surely this was the Son of God. This one's different. This one stands out. And of course we know, worst day ever, best day ever at the same time. But I want you to notice the next couple of verses. There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Younger. I feel sorry that you have to be known as James the Younger, because there was a James the Older, right? James was a very common name. So was Mary. 1 in 5 women during the time of Jesus was named Mary. Just a little tidbit right there. James the Younger and Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him. And there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. One of the things that Luke tells us, and this is kind of a cool thing, Luke tells us that there was a group of women, and we know that some of these women were involved in this, that were the financing behind Jesus' ministry in Galilee. And they followed him around and encouraged him. And I think if they started with Jesus, they also finished with Jesus. We talk about many of those who, in many ways, abandoned Jesus and were really kind of not good. We find some. We find some that abided. Some who remained faithful to Jesus regardless of what they were going through. So I want to go back to the questions. I want to go back to those who ridiculed Jesus and ask the question, why can't he save himself? Well, why doesn't he just save himself? He did this, why doesn't he do this? He helped people, he healed people, he raised the dead to life, he's done all this. Why can't he save himself? Now, I'm of the belief, we can be different in this, but I'm of the belief that Jesus could have. I think Jesus could have done anything he wanted. I think about the time that they were wanting to throw Jesus off a cliff, and he walked through the crowd like, you can't touch me. So I do believe that Jesus could have saved himself. I do believe he could have tapped out at any moment. He could have called 10,000 angels, and this would have been over with if he wanted. In fact, the only movie I have ever been to by myself is The Passion of the Christ. And I don't even think that even gets to how bad it was. But I remember being at that movie just saying, Jesus, just be done. Just don't. Because of what he was enduring. And so I believe Jesus could. I believe Jesus could save himself. But here's our bottom line. Jesus could have saved himself. He chose to save people instead. This was not an ability sort of thing. This was a choice sort of thing. I'm going to go back to there's no one good. There's no one righteous. There's no one holy. No one seeks God. No one lives up to the holy standards. And Jesus knew that. And knowing that full well said, I've got a solution. I know what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is a perfect sacrifice. The perfect sacrifice is me. I will meet all of the righteous requirements of the law. I will pay for all of these sins. So Jesus could have. But he chose your sin and my sin instead. Because he knew that there was one thing we could never do for ourselves, and that is stand right before God. So he took it upon himself. So with this, I want to throw out a couple of items, ways that we can own this here today. One is this. Leave the door cracked open. I don't know where everyone is here today, but I know that there are a lot of people in our world today that are kind of on the fence when it comes to Jesus. They're just not sure what to do with Jesus. They're not sure where they stand. They're not really sure what they believe. It's like, I'm intrigued, but I'm not there. I think I'm there, but I'm not quite there. If you're there, continue to lean into Jesus. And if you've never prayed before, I would encourage you just to pray a simple prayer. It tells us in the book of Jeremiah that if we seek God, we will find him. God will be found. And so with that, just say, God, I don't know what to do with Jesus. And so I'm just going to ask that you reveal yourself through him to me to get me to that place where I know you want me to be. Also, you may have already kind of worked through some of the doubts and the issues of whether this is right or not. And it's just a matter where you need to make a decision. So you need to decide. And when we think about you need to decide, I think about this. There was one there on that day who made a decision. He actually made a statement. This statement was a belief in Jesus. And maybe you need to reach a point in your life where you say, I've worked it all through, but I've never actually said those words, that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is Lord. He is the one who can save me, and maybe you need to do that today. And finally this, abide. It's kind of a churchy word. Abide in Jesus. I think about the women here who began with Jesus and walked with Jesus and were with Jesus at the cross. Many of them, or a few of them, actually got to see the evidence of the resurrection before anyone else, because they continued in their faith and their trust and their devotion to Jesus. And listen, I think a lot of times we think about what we need to do for Jesus. We think about, well, I want to do this, and I want to be known in this way. And here's the reality. Jesus is not asking you to do anything for him other than abide in him, to continue in him. In John chapter 15, in fact, we're going to look at what are called the I am statements after the series in Mark. And in John chapter 15, Jesus says, I'm the vine, you're the branches. The job of the branch is to remain in me, abide in me. I'll take care of the fruit. I'll take care of what I need to do through you. I just want you to trust me. I want you to walk with me. And I think sometimes we get so busy doing for God, we forget to walk with Jesus. And so maybe the decision is, I've made a decision. I need to decide just to walk with Jesus more faithfully every day. Will you join me in prayer? Father in heaven, wherever we are, I pray that we take that next step into walking with your Son. Maybe it's just even saying, Jesus, I don't know if you're real, but I want to know. Maybe it's saying, I want to follow Jesus. I want to walk with him. And the other is just maybe saying, I need to walk better with him. So thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.